Hello everyone, back again with movie and tune recap. Today, I'm going to explain an American supernatural horror film from 2006, titled Unrest. Spoilers ahead, so watch out and take care. The movie opens with a voiceover describing a group of archaeologists excavating a sacred temple, and one of them warns the leader that they should stop the operation. The movie then cuts to a woman, Alita Kovis, who has been admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Staring at herself in a mirror as if possessed, she breaks it, takes a shard of glass, and fatally kills herself. The scene shifts to two morgue attendants, Malcolm and Ivan, as they receive a body shipped from Brazil. They take it to the anatomy lab, notice several cuts on the corpse, clean it, and discuss its condition. Ivan then retrieves another cadaver from the storage tank, and Malcolm makes a rude remark about it. Later, while washing up in the bathroom, Malcolm hears strange noises, and believing it is Ivan, he calls out but gets no reply. Suddenly, blood drips from the ceiling onto his face, and he sees something alarming. The story then follows Allison Blanchard, a student newly admitted to medical school, who will be living at the hospital. The next day, Dr. Walter Blackwell, an anatomy professor, welcomes the new medical students and leads them to the lab. He introduces himself, gives them the key code for accessing the lab, and assigns them into groups of 4, each receiving a cadaver for dissection. Allison joins a group of 3 male students, Brian, Carlos, and Rick, and when they uncover their cadaver, a young woman, Allison vomits and collapses to the floor. After helping her, Allison is taken to the professor's office, where she tells Dr. Blackwell that she sensed something strange about the cadaver. He assures her that it is only her mind playing tricks on her since it is her first experience. She returns to the lab and rejoins her group as they prepare to begin the dissection. The medical students discover that the body has several self-inflicted wounds, and Allison notices that the young woman had given birth. It is revealed that the cadaver is the same one the morgue attendants received from Brazil, and Allison becomes eager to learn more about its history. That night, Allison wakes from a nightmare, and unable to fall back asleep, heads to the anatomy lab. She finds her lab partners already dissecting the body without her, and Brian tells her they couldn't reach her. After opening the chest cavity, they remove the thorax, and all of them notice the heart give a slight beat. Allison moves closer to check, but Rick starts playing with the body, startling her. Carlos scolds him, saying it is wrong to play with a corpse, and Rick apologizes. When they finish, they change and go to the canteen to grab a beer, and while there, Rick's fiancée, Jennifer, unexpectedly shows up. When she complains about a smell, Allison tells her it is from their cadaver, and Jennifer asks Rick to show it to her, but he says he will do it another day. Carlos becomes upset, telling Rick he is being disrespectful toward the dead body, but Rick ignores him and takes Jennifer to the anatomy lab to show her the cadaver. When Jennifer touches the body, she tells Rick it feels strangely warm, but Rick insists that's impossible, until he touches it himself. As Jennifer examines the lungs, the cadaver suddenly takes a breath, and terrified, she runs out of the lab. Rick follows her and tries to calm her down, and he asks her to wait while he returns to the lab to cover the body. When he comes back, he doesn't see Jennifer at first, but then finds her lying in the hallway, bleeding out. That night, Allison wakes from another nightmare and calls Brian. She tells him she can't stop thinking about their cadaver, but Brian advises her to let it go, saying it doesn't concern her. The next morning, Allison sneaks into Professor Blackwell's office and looks through the files of the imported corpses. She searches the filing cabinet and finds the folder containing photos of the bodies, including their own cadaver, which she secretly takes. Later, she shows Brian the picture and asks if he knows anything about it. He says no and tells her to look it up online. Brian urges her to stop worrying about their cadaver and drop the matter, and it becomes clear that there are feelings between them. The following day in gross anatomy class, Dr. Blackwell informs Allison and her partners that Rick has withdrawn from school after losing his fiancée, leaving the group shocked. Later, Allison visits Rick at the hospital where he has been admitted. She consoles him, and Rick tells her how Jennifer died, explaining that he was unable to help her. Allison visits the school therapist, Dr. Carolyn, to talk about her feelings regarding the cadaver. She tells her that she can sense spirits and believes something is seriously wrong with the body. Dr. Carolyn explains that it is normal for medical students to feel unsettled by cadavers, but Allison insists that this situation is different. Meanwhile, Ivan goes to the lab to clean the bodies and suddenly notices the cadaver move, and when he checks it, he sees a liquid oozing from its skin. He is then startled by Allison, who asks if he knows where the body came from. Ivan says he doesn't and that only Malcolm would know, but he hasn't seen Malcolm since the bodies were prepared. Later, Allison researches the cadaver but finds nothing. She and Brian return to the lab, where Allison senses something hidden in the cadaver tank. Because the tank is locked, she removes the cover from the top, and Brian hands her a pole, which she uses to poke inside the tank. Suddenly, the pole gets stuck on something. She tries to pull it out but can't, even when she reaches her hand into the water. Brian helps her, and after some struggle, they manage to free the pole. They report the incident to the police, and when the locked tank is opened, they are shocked to find Ivan's lifeless body inside. Allison begins to suspect that Jennifer's and Ivan's deaths are connected to the cadaver, but Dr. Blackwell dismisses her claims. Later, he calls Allison and Brian in and questions them about why they were searching the tank. Allison tells him she feels a strange presence in the lab and believes the cadaver wants her to find something. The professor thinks she is imagining things and considers her claims irrational. That night, Brian decides to stay with Allison at the hospital, and they take turns bathing to wash off the stench of the tank water. While Brian is bathing, he begins to hear strange noises, and suddenly the lights go out, and spooked, he finishes quickly and goes to Allison's room. He asks to excuse himself so he can put on his clothes, but Allison, too frightened to be in the hallway alone, refuses. She tells Brian to change in front of her, and they eventually make love. Later, Allison goes to the bathroom to use the toilet when the shower suddenly turns on. Thinking it is Brian, she calls out to him, but there is no response, and to her horror, she finds Malcolm's lifeless body in the shower. She tries to leave, but the bathroom door won't open, and hearing her screams, Brian rushes to help her, and together they see an image drawn in blood. The next morning, Allison visits Dr. Carolyn and tells her that the cadaver is trying to communicate something and that she needs to figure it out before it kills her. Seeing Allison frightened, Dr. Carolyn accompanies her to Professor Blackwell to ask questions about the cadaver. Allison believes the cadaver's spirit is not at rest, and at first, Blackwell refuses to answer, believing Allison is unwell. Under pressure from Dr. Carolyn, he finally reveals that the body belonged to Alida Covas, an American citizen living in Brazil, the same woman seen at the beginning of the events, and Dr. Carolyn instructs the professor to remove the body. Later, Allison and Brian search for information on Alida Covas online and come across 30 pages written in Portuguese. Since Carlos knows Spanish, they ask him for help, but he initially refuses to get involved. Allison warns him that 3 people who have handled the cadaver have already died, and if they don't figure out what is happening, they might be next, and convinced, Carlos agrees to assist them. Meanwhile, Rick gradually becomes unstable, and he is interrogated by the police, as they believe he is the one who murdered Jennifer, but he remains silent. He is eventually admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where he is seen sharpening an object in his room. The next day in anatomy class, Professor Blackwell informs Allison that their cadaver has been replaced. Later, Carlos explains to Allison and Brian what he has discovered about Alida Covas. She was a murderer on death row who lured her victims through intimacy. Carlos shows them various old tapes of Covas from when she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, and one which she appeared to be a normal person. In one of the tapes, Covas reveals she can sense spirits, similar to Allison, and afterward, she became a prostitute and began exhibiting symptoms of mental instability. The following day, Allison visits Rick in his ward to ask what he and Jennifer did to Covas's body that might have angered her spirit. However, Rick attacks Allison, and a guard intervenes to protect her, and during the struggle, Rick injures Allison's arm, and Brian helps her treat it. That night, while in her room, Allison and Brian are making love when the lamplight suddenly goes out and the door closes on its own, frightening them both. Brian and Allison go to investigate and notice blood seeping through a door, and when Brian opens it, Allison senses something strange, and they see the image of a statue. Later, while alone in the library, Carlos hears strange noises. He grabs a book about the Aztecs, and as he flips through it, he comes across a page where the words "You are next" are written in blood. The next morning, a horrific incident occurs. The students discover Carlos's dead body, and Allison notices the same statue she had seen the previous night in the book. Fearing for their lives, Brian and Allison research Alida Covas. They discover that she was an archaeologist who once led an expedition to an Aztec sacrificial site, where she uncovered 50,000 bodies offered to Tlazolteotl, the Aztec god of fertility and prostitution. Afterwards, she became possessed, turned to prostitution, and began murdering men to rid them of their filth. Later in life, she committed additional murders and was eventually placed in a mental asylum, where she died, presumably by her own hand. Meanwhile, the police guard assigned to watch Rick goes to his room to retrieve his food. Rick thanks him for protecting him and then hands him a letter to deliver to Allison. Immediately afterward, Rick slashes the guard's throat with a sharp object. Brian and Allison are informed of Rick's death and rush to the scene, and Rick's letter is given to Allison. Upon opening it, she sees the words "You're next," leading her to suspect that Alida Covas's body is still in the hospital, since the spirit remains wherever the body is. She questions Professor Blackwell, who had earlier claimed to have removed the body from the hospital. He warns Allison that if she continues her nonsense, he will have no choice but to suspend her. Later, Allison and Brian return to the anatomy lab and break open the door covering the cadaver tank, where they discover another body. After removing the tank lid, Brian uses a pole to probe the water, and to their shock, they find Alida Covas's body. Brian attempts to lift the body out, but it is stuck. He enters the tank and tries to raise it with his legs, but it still won't move. He then submerges himself fully, and while struggling to free the body, a hand suddenly grabs his leg, trapping him. Allison jumps into the tank to help, and the lid suddenly slams shut, sealing them inside. After freeing Brian's leg, they try to get out but realize they are trapped, and unable to hold his breath any longer, Brian begins to drown. After a frantic struggle, Allison manages to open the tank lid and pulls Brian's unconscious body out, and fortunately, Brian survives. Allison then returns to the tank, and together they lift Alida Covas's body out. However, something supernatural attacks Brian, severely injuring him. Hearing Allison's screams for help, Professor Blackwell arrives, and together, they place both Brian and Alida Covas's body on a stretcher, and Allison runs to get more help. Allison manages to gain the attention of two men, who take the injured Brian to the hospital. Suddenly, Allison begins to hear strange noises coming from the lab and quietly goes to investigate. To her horror, she finds Alida Covas's body dismembered by Blackwell, who is then attacked by something, causing him to lose consciousness and suffer a severed leg. Allison gathers the dismembered body of Alida Covas into a bag and drags it to the crematorium. She places the remains in the cremator and burns the body before leaving the room. The next day, Allison visits Brian in the hospital, where he is gradually recovering. She shares some news with him. She has decided to drop out of medical school, and explains that they are going to Brazil to lay Alida Covas's ashes to rest. Days later, Allison and Brian travel to Brazil to scatter the ashes, hoping to put the spirit to rest and free the medical school from the rage unleashed by the desecration of her body. The movie concludes with Blackwell, now surviving in a wheelchair, welcoming newly admitted medical students to the lab. However, it is revealed that the spirit of Alida Covas still lingers in the hospital. Okay guys, that's all the recap about Unrest from 2006. Thanks for watching, see you again in the next video.